Good morning, everyone. It's Francis, Martin, and Curt for the Natural Institute. This is Friday, May 1st, 2026. It's our office hours Q&A where you submit your questions. I guess we don't have to filter them very much anymore. Martin takes his cut at them, and I add depth and color. Francis, the way it works is Francis generally reads the question. Martin gives his view, and then I give mine. There's a link in the comments. I believe it's called comments. No, it's called
Video description.
Description, so that you can go to the site where you can submit your questions. We try to keep a inventory of upcoming questions, so that we don't run out of questions to answer. And so there's sometimes a delay between the time at which you ask the question and we answer it. Some people are extremely good at coming up with questions, but the more you have, the better. It's amazing to us. So we have hundreds of them now, right? We have hundreds of these things.
Close to 400,
answered.
I think.
Yeah. So, all right. Well, if that's the case, well, let's get going.
All right. Let's start with question number 1 from Roger. Why do the overwhelming majority of highly intelligent, greater 150 IQ scientists go into mathematics, physics, or computer science instead of biology, psychology, sociology, economics, or law? Is this because the aforementioned fields have a much higher degree of closure, which highly systematizing brain finds more gravitating than fields with lesser closure? And if you define scientific method if your definitive scientific method became mainstream, would it naturally mean that there would be an osmosis of the intelligent elite to the soft sciences? Could also be the bell curve statistically leading to these patterns, or 150 IQ working memory being less important, rewarding in latter subjects.
I wrote a long response here as I thought through it. But I think the answer is actually relatively simple in 2 dimensions. One is that the higher your IQ, the less you depend on the needs, on the mind of others for information decision. These fields tend to be more dependent upon your thinking than on either others' thinking or any degree of normativity, where normativity is a driver in most of the behavioral scientific fields. The second is that it's quite just like if you're an athlete exercising, it's the maximum without failure is the way the human mind works. It's just more interesting, in other words, and it's also more rewarding to work in the exposition of novelty or problem solving in the thing that is at the limit of your ability than it is less than that. These are normal human issues. The third is that status, right? I'm going to get all 4 of them. The third is status, because these fields have higher status specifically because they're harder. And the fourth one, if I didn't lose it, is that I don't know how to describe this, but it's a very clean way of thinking. And it's the most distant from subjectively influenced and the most objectively driven. So in the sense of what you're thinking about, it's very clear and clean. It's simply complex. So in those senses, the problem is increasingly attractive to people with higher IQs for mental, psychological, and social status reasons. So I don't think it's actually very hard to understand why people do this. If you can get higher status in the academic, especially in those fields, and that status is not only uh, affects your self-image, which is an improvement, but there's something to suit for, but it also affects your external, your internal self-assessment versus your external status. Plus, it's mentally rewarding. Plus, it is when you're up there in the IQ points, you become less concerned with the subjective and more concerned with the objective. This is also true. You become more interested in what's going on in your mind than the minds of others. And so it's a normal sort of selection process into how the mind works. So I don't think it's mysterious at all. I think the way you said it here, though, was pretty correct. Give me a second. They have higher degree of closure. Right. It's a closure that's non-normative, right? It doesn't matter what other people think or what other people feel or whatever. It's just true or not, which is very rewarding to the systematizing brain, right? So your observe who wrote this? Do we know, Roger? So your intuition is largely correct. I just tried to add the other dimensions that affect the person in to your original insight. Did I do okay there?
Well, you wrote a lot. I would ask that you put this in the X article or something, or
All
X
right.
post.
Uh, yeah, I was just sort of working through the issue here. Yes,
Mm-hmm.
I think the insight I had in response to your question is here at the end, which is that in our work, what we have done is create universal commensurability and explain the arc of closure across all fields. And then we have a system of measurement that is field independent. So I think most of us would consider any closure in any field ascertainable under our methods. Um, and that we actually go the other direction. It's because we are able to use closure in these other directions, the universal commensurability, is that we find the problems that are hard to close more interesting than the complex problems that need to find a means of closure. So we work largely in behavior because we have a means of addressing closure in human behavior. So um, my opinion is that if we could, in other words, the reason I'm making this little digression here is that if we succeed, our organization succeeds in promulgating the concept that closure is available in high dimensional systems, in other words, the behavioral sciences, then maybe the capacity of intellectuals to find comfort in additional fields will also manifest. So people might select into additional fields. I I find that probably true in the kind of things we do, which is first principles. But in general, you're still talking about things that fields that where subjectivity is still a perceived value to people. So I don't think I think that we can make better intellectuals in some fields, but we can't necessarily alter the fields too much because there is that subjectivity that drives people into those fields if they do not lack the ability to work purely by what we would think of as low is fields highly open to closure. I try not to get too nerdy sometimes during these conversations, but there's points where I can't really avoid it.
Well, I
Um,
was gonna say this is a good. I think this is a good place to talk about correlation, causation, and closure. The exchange that we had on the staff channel. What is it? Last week or just a few days ago?
just a few days ago, I think.
Yes. Do you remember that one? So, who was it that was it? Josh or Luke
Well, I
that
brought
came
it
up
up
with it?
first.
Okay. Yeah, it was
But
probably you then, Martin. Well,
yeah, I
so
was just pointing out that at least in the real world, not in math, uh, we find out our causation via correlation. There's no getting around it.
We converge on causation through correlation, yes.
mhm.
And once we have causation, we can produce closure. Correct.
So
Uh,
most
in,
Uh,
people. Go
what?
ahead,
in
Martin.
fact, everything our brains are doing is correlation.
Well, that's you know that's all right. Well, what you mean is there's correlation between what we're thinking and reality, I think is what you mean. But when you're talking
I
about,
mean, we're just correlating to events or uh,
right,
correlating
right, right.
relate.
But but that's, I had this same problem with someone else earlier. Oh, it was Josh earlier this week. Confusing the difference between how humans think and what we can write down and prove. In other words, what can we render computational? So, in the sense that the process of discovery is almost always a process of correlation, or I would actually see it as continuous recursive disambiguation um, by correlation and falsification, right? Which is the way you clarify whatever
Hmm.
correlation you mean. You would do what Popper called verisimilitude, which is continuously narrowing your problem through correlation, justification, falsification, and recursive search for correlation right into, so it's basically a winnowing process.
Hmm.
That's what goes on in the mind. All right. But when we are trying to make a formalism, in other words, we're making a formal science, a formal means of whatever we're doing, essentially what I have been trying to do is create computability, because if I can have write down computability in law, that means that we can have decidability in law. So there's a difference between what you can express independent of the mind across all minds by what we call a reduction, right? It's what all grammars are, some sort of reduction. Um, and in our case, reduction to first principles, right, which is causality. That's different. That's different from the subjective experience of the process that you're doing it. So, in the same degree as you can think about things, but until you can write them down as a procedure or as a logic, then you have still got something that requires subjective interpretation. And what we are trying to do is create, or I am trying to do, which is somewhat different from what you try to do, Martin. It's not entirely different, but somewhat different. Is I'm trying to create a formalism, a body of law that is independent of the person thinking it, and that is not the same as the subjective experience of how the mind approaches a problem. Instead, it's how we as humans use a protocol to falsify alternatives to the solution of causality. Again, I'm feel like I'm being overly nerdy, but I
No, I
can't
I,
tell.
don't think you're being
I,
nerdy
I
enough. Hey,
wasn't conflating them. I was just pointing out correlation is a necessary part of the process.
yes.
Right. This is here's the argument. Is that it starts with Hume and his saying there is no induction, it's always deduction, which is essentially the same thing that you're saying, right? You're just deducing one thing from another thing from another thing from another thing by correlation, right? By comparison. A correlation is technically a statistical function, but we're going to keep it to the we're going to use it in the more general version of there's a there's a there's a pattern here and a pattern here, and these patterns are similar. Um, so the correlation, so you're absolutely correctly right. The problem is when you I can't believe you said I'm not being nerdy enough. The well, the problem is when we get to the point where we say the subjective versus the objective, you're talking about how we get there, and I'm trying to talk about how we write a proof, and it's really that small a difference between what you and I are saying. What were you? So you say I wasn't being nerdy
Well,
enough, Chris?
well, I'm only half joking. When I said you're not being nerdy enough, is I want you to jump to the closure part, right? Because to me, the relationship between correlation and causation is fairly clear. I mean, there's that old adage that correlation doesn't equal to causation, but like Martin pointed out, in order for something to have causal relationship, they have to have certain level of correlation. If two
Yeah,
events are
I
completely
think
uncorrelated, then you could say that causation is not possible. The if I recall correctly, where the fellows had the most discussion on is with regard to closure. Um, and here, the reason I brought this up now is because this question ultimately is about the possibility or degree of closure in these different fields. So,
Oh, I see. So you want me to
double click on closure. I should have just said that.
what?
Double click on closure. What do we mean by closure? And what does the NLI method allow? How does the NLI method allow us to extend closure into fields that previously closure was not possible?
Okay. This is one of those things where I don't want to say it off the top of my head. Um, Give me a second here. I'm going to pull up my. I think I have written about this on why AI fails outside of narrow high closure domains. Yeah, that's too that's not general enough. Um, all right, I'll just see if I can do it off the top of my head then without thinking it, getting my head in the headspace of it. Give me one more second here. All right. What does closure mean? Closure means it's hard to do without talking about grammars.
So I'm going to act on behalf of the audience and just state my
Your
understanding.
understanding of it.
Right. So correlation means that we notice a pattern in layman speak, right? That notice a pattern that when A happens, B tends to happen. Causations were actually found the mechanisms by which B happens when A takes place. Closure means that we have not, well, let's put it this way, causation, when we establish a causal relationship, we become fairly confident to the point of we might as well treat it as truth that when A happens, then B will take place. But we do not know for certain that in all circumstances this relationship exists. Closure means that we have, in a sense, proven beyond a shadow of doubt that when A takes place, B will follow. Let's start with that basis and then continue to
Right.
disambiguate.
Yeah, thank you for putting my head in the right space. Okay, so here's remember what we're doing, right? We're not doing what the world has been doing. We have to use words that the people know
Mm-hmm.
to
Yes.
talk about what we're doing. All
That's
right,
exactly what I'm trying to do here.
right. So, um, you need in order to do comparisons, you need a system of measurement, right? That measurement has to be make it sufficient for relatively unambiguous distinctions, right? And that is somewhat difficult, right? Now, all right. So excuse me. I should say, need a paradigm. A
Mm-hmm.
paradigm is a frame of reference through which you look at some problem, some question, right? You need a system of measurement within that paradigm. A grammar is the set of terms, relations,
Mm-hmm.
operations, constraints, transformations, right? We think of these as nouns, and nouns, verbs, um, uh, and
Adverbs.
approvals, agreements, whatever, adverbs and adjectives, right? We think of those terms as in our language, we think of it. But if you think of them as an operational grammar like math and programming, in other words, that these are all the
Mm-hmm.
same, it's still doing the same thing. It's just with in math, it's a very limited set of operations verbs you can refer to, and nouns and verbs. In programming, it's a broader set of nouns and verbs you can refer to, and in operational prose, it's a broader set of them you can go to, and in formal written language, it's a broader set, and in informal language, it's a broader set, and in idiomatic language, which is what most people actually speak in, um, it's a shorthand for which is even broader, and then you get into the narrative, storytelling, fiction, fictionalism, deception sequence, right? So you're really talking about what is the constraint, right? What is the constraint that you apply to language that lets you stick within the limits of the paradigm, right?
Mm-hmm.
In other words, it's a constraint. So you can't bring in different kinds of measurement, right? Things need to be commensurable within it. So you need a paradigm, which is something you're trying to look at. That paradigm consists of a set of permissible dimensions. We're only going to talk about these things because they're the only things we can testify to. In the case we're saying what's testifiable, what's reciprocal, and what is possible and what is liable. And then you have a system of measurement for it, right? Which what we use is operationalism. You have a grammar, right? Which is, continuous recursive disambiguation. We have a grammar, which is basically operationalism. Now, what is closure means that the grammar that you're using to constrain what can be said inside that system of measurement, inside that paradigm, enough to adjudicate, in other words, terminate a decision without discretion. In other words, the information is
I see. You have
complete.
you have sufficiently constructed a grammar within that system measurement to describe all phenomena that can occur and make all and decide on all matters, adjudicating all matters within that paradigm.
Right. It's like the problem is usually this way. Are you discussing philosophy while sneaking in theology? Are you discussing empiricism while sneaking in either philosophy or theology? Are you discussing science while sneaking in empiricism but not causality? Are you sneaking in are you working in what we do, um, which is operationalism, right? Which is we literally know every fucking step along the way. There's no
Let's
doubt.
use so before we go there, right? Let's take a
All
step
right.
back. So let's use a high closure domain such as mathematics. So
Yes.
we're pretty confident today that given the mathematical grammar, we can decide on all things mathematics. What happens when someone discovers a new branch of mathematics? Because think about Newton, right? Newton invented calculus. Before him, there was no calculus, none of that integration sign, and so on.
Right.
So when he discovered it, before he discovered mathematics, would we say that, well, mathematics have not achieved full closure because there's this branch of mathematics that's yet to be discovered, and once he discovered it, we're now one step closer to closure?
You've illustrated why knowledge of mathematics is valuable in talking about everything else, because it's the simplest example, right? It makes things very clear. So I'm trying to make sure I got how you said that. So if I think of it this way, when I said you need a paradigm, all right, that's a point of view, right? Right. I might look at a thing from this side or from that side or whatever. That's a really abstract way of saying that I'm looking at a projection of a manifold against a surface. So when I say here's a one-dimensional object, right? And I project it across a surface, right? Surface. It's going to always be the same because that implies the surface is consistent, right? It's a two-dimensional space, right? When I say a three-dimensional space, now I got a problem, because if I take this same same object and I rotate it, right, in three-dimensional space, the projection I see is going to be different, right? It's going to be different. The projection is the commensurability, right? It's the standard of weights and measures against which we can judge things, right? So we're creating the projection is the system of measurement we are using to develop commensurability between different possibilities. Does that make sense?
Well, I mean, I got it from the geometry sense and the
Yes.
the
Well,
projection sense.
right. So but that's why it's important to get the idea, is that you're creating a standard by which all things can be compared, right? So in that sense, you're creating a system of measurement that is bound by the same criteria, a baseline, right? By that projection. Most higher mathematics is essentially some kind of projection once you get beyond, right? And so what you are trying to do is say, how is this point here relative to the projection, right? You can figure that out. How is this point here relative to the projection? But once we have that, we can how points are relative to one another, independent of their individual context. So, so when we say it's the same thing that LLMs are doing, right? They're projecting the grammar through the manifold of their latent space and producing a standard of weights and measure, which is iteratively improved by attention. Anyway, sorry, I shouldn't have taken that sidebar. So in mathematics, we have created a projection to create a system of measurement. Now, in mathematics, there's already a grammar, right? There's only so many things we can do. That's because just as we use continuous recursive disambiguation of the ternary logic, math uses ratios. Everything in mathematics is not is just a ratio of one thing to another.
Mm-hmm.
It's not an absolute. You need a context to create an absolute reference. So 12 apples, 16 oranges, right? But in general, it's context and scale independent, because we're talking about the ratio of one thing to another, right? So the grammar set of terms, right? In other words, numbers, positional names is really what it is. Ratios, which is relations, operations, addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, those things. And transformations, which is good. I don't want to go there because it's too fucking complicated. It's basically a function. A function is a transformation, right? And so you are bound by the grammar of that system of measurement, meaning you can only refer to certain things, right? Which is basically positional names. And you can, and that's all there is you can refer to which is a noun. And you can only refer to so many operations, which is a verb. And you can only address certain tests of agreement, which would be equal, unequal, less than, greater than, etc. Right? It's very simple primitive grammar. But in essence, when an enclosure is held by those constraints, you're constraining it to the use of ratios to describe positions, or difference in positional names, right, as a means of conducting a measurement of anything that can be expressed as scale independent and bound by the same measure. So all grammars are doing the same thing. They're just saying, what's the limit of the set of things we can refer to that when operations are performed on it stays within the set of things we can refer to. Does that make
that makes perfect sense, because in the let's just use basic arithmetic as an example, right? You have numbers, which are position names, and they're in cardinal space. Then you have the operators and the equal sign and so on. So that set of grammar is sufficient to describe the paradigm, that specific paradigm, and let's use a really simple example of just all the integers, right? So
yes,
then
exactly.
that we could say though that now the grammar can achieve closure because it can describe anything in that projection space. But then what happens when I guess when you invent new tools like calculus, it's still describing did calculus invent a new grammar, or is simply invented, well, it wouldn't be a new grammar, it invented new relationships or new operators.
It invented the use of geometry. It invented a trick of geometry. Essentially, it's still just triangles. Right? I mean, when you're doing a area under curve, you create a baseline, which is what we would call a projection.
So you're actually doing infinite number. You're actually, what you're doing is similar to like computer tessellation. Rather than describing a perfect mathematical curve, you're breaking down to infinitesimal polygons, and then the answer you get is approximate to that ultimate curve.
It is, because if you take a thing and you make a square and then you make a triangle out of it somehow, right?
Yeah, it's just
roughly
tessellation.
Speaking, they balance each other out, right? I mean, the triangles average each other out. But it's simply the same. It's simply pi. I mean, if you think about it, what's pi? It's the same fucking problem. So all he did is take pi and say, okay, outside of the circle, I'm just going to use this against a baseline. And instead of having a circle break about degrees, where I'm playing this game of infinite regression, right? I'm actually triangles. I'm just going to do it as a flat plane, right? As a baseline, instead of the center of the circle, I'm going to use a baseline, and I'm going to do triangles that way. And once you understand it's that simple, it's like, why didn't we figure that shit out beforehand?
So
right?
I guess my question is then, going back to the reason I asked this question, is did Newton invent a new grammar, or did he invent a new set of operations within that grammar that better described the paradigm of mathematics?
Um, I would say, well, you know how we work, right? The grammars are a spectrum,
Mm-hmm.
and at some point you're going to say, well, um, is this really any different from the grammar of geometry? And I would say no.
Mm.
I would say you have arithmetic, you have mathematics, and you have geometry, and that's it. Because it's all, I mean, essentially geometry is a ternary logic, right? It's triangles. You can't get anywhere without the triangles. You're not going to get any serious development. It's the same thing we do with the ternary logic. You're not going to get anywhere without it. Without it, you can't make things commensurable. They're not testable because they're not causally. But if you got a triangle, if you got triangles, you can measure anything because you have a constant, right, and a ratio, which is the hypotenuse, right? And so it's as long as you have a constant and a hypotenuse is. I don't wonder if anybody talks about mathematics like this other than I don't know if I've ever met anybody. I don't know if there's any real first. There are
Well,
people who talk about math, but I don't know.
I was going to say, nobody talks about mathematics like this except probably Michael, who's our
Yeah,
mathematician.
yeah.
Uh,
So
I I would describe mathematics as a logic of relationships between quantities,
yes,
and Newton and, for that matter, Leibniz discovered new relationships, and that required new operators.
yes. I think that's the right way of answering the question. Thank you, Martin. So is it a paradigm? The question is always, is there a difference between counting, accounting, in other words, addition, subtraction, right? Multiplication, division, and mathematics? Because when you're talking about mathematics, they actually mean mathematical reasoning in general, right? So it's always like, well, where do you want to draw the line here, right? For us to draw the line is to say, well, I mean, counting is pretty simple, right? I mean, early humans just did one,
Mm-hmm.
two, and more, right? That was their version of counting, right? Once you get into commerce and you have assets and inventory, you need to have accounting, which is additions of, bigger numbers, you have positional names, addition and subtraction. You don't have to have a base 60 system like the freaking, what is it? Uh, not the Babylonians, the Assyrians, right? You don't have to have that, but you do need some sort of positional names, and because you can't express things that humans can disassemble without some sort of positional names, right? But then when you get into mathematics, you're talking about reasoning, and that's not the same as counting, right? You're talking about you're not talking about counting is giving names to things. Accounting is giving names to things and moving sets around. But once you're working in mathematical logic, you're actually trying to use a process of deduction in order to find a way of measuring something with the limited tools we have. So I would agree with Martin. It's just all the same shit. But I mean, it's the same thing with any field. I mean, let's look at programming. You have the original kind of programming, which is just a list of commands you follow, a
Mm-hmm.
script, basically. Then you had functional programming, which allow you to create more complex operations. My generation, it was object-oriented programming because we wanted to be able to build simulations. And to some degree what we do today with Bayesian accounting. In other words, it's almost like the infinite regress problem in measurements, whether we talk about circles or curves. You have a problem of near infinite regress and precision of difference between the combinations of terms. So, I mean, is it all the same? Yeah, it's all the fucking same. You know, it's just,
I think there's an important thing here is that, and this is maybe going back to my original question, when we could say that Newton invented a more precision instrument in
correct,
the grammar to describe the mathematical paradigm.
right?
But
That's a logic.
even without his invention of calculus, math as a set of grammar that we had before still able to achieve closure, because even at a lower precision level, it has a grammar sufficient enough to fully describe the paradigm, fully
Correct,
describe the projection. And
correct.
fast forward, right, to what we're doing is we found a way of measuring things that are not in cardinal or even ordinal space.
Right. We use natural names. Yep.
Yes.
Which is
It's the
it's all
number.
that's available to an LLM, right? It's all that's available. But because an LLM is using language as a system of measurement. We basically take the LLM and we say, okay, we're going to constrain you to operational prose and testing this sets of dimensions. Essentially, we're creating a geometry for the measuring of words, right? That's essentially what we're doing.
And therefore making it possible to achieve closure in fields that previously closure
We're
isn't possible.
that's correct.
Because we
I would say the number of new relationships you could discover in math is essentially infinite, but unlike calculus, most of them would be useless in the real world.
Mhm, mhm.
right, because it describes phenomena that does not occur in the real world.
Right. I mean, it's just like I love that argument, Martin. It's just like, well, we can tell stories all day long, right? But how are any of them true, right? Well, math, you can tell a story in math, right? That is, I mean, in the grammar of mathematics, that isn't true, right? I mean, or isn't even sensible.
And it can be true because it just has to be logical. But so
Yes.
what? What does that tell us about anything real?
Yep. So that goes back to your correlation argument. You can make up a description, but unless we have correlation, and then we can determine whether it's causal, right? We don't know if it's true or not. Exactly. So the system we talk about is paradigm, system of measurement, grammar, closure, which I think you did a great job, Francis. And decidability is really the last form of closure. So just this is so it's important to say this because we are talking about the subjective experience, which is Martin is explaining, the objective proof that we write, and then which is the closure. That's the logical closure in the paradigm. But the last question is, does that meet the criteria for decidability, which is, does this having discovered closure, have we satisfied the demand for infallibility in the context in question? In other words, we may define closure in a system, but does that closure actually provide us with the information necessary to determine whether we want to take a risk? Does that make sense? So, let's say that the precision of mathematics is scale independent,
Mm-hmm.
but the reality is there are levels of machining, right? Tools
Mhm.
that are below which we are not capable of performing,
Mhm.
right? And so if the closure, the search for closure in that might seem like it's infinite in mathematics, but it's actually not infinite in practice,
Correct.
right?
You can never have
And
a perfect 90-degree angle in the real world.
correct. And so this you have to satisfy. So the last piece of closure, right? Cloud closure is a logical requirement, whereas decidability is an applied logical requirement. What are the limits in reality?
Hmm.
Is that am I getting there? I have to watch your eyes and make sure that I'm making sense.
I'm trying to determine closures, and so closure describes whether the grammar is sufficient to describe the entire paradigm.
Right.
But then decidability is when you apply that to reality.
To a case, right? Right, to an individual case. When you apply it, and so the reason I use mathematics of measurement is that mathematics is scale independent,
Hmm.
but action isn't scale independent.
Hmm.
In other words, human capacity to act on materials is not scale independent, right? We can come out with you need, uh, something precise in measurement out to 1,009s to the right of the decimal place. Well, we don't have any. There's no way of us to working with steel at not at that level of precision. I mean, even the
At
difference
some
in
point, you're going
temperature.
to have to. At some point, if you keep on going, you're going to have to split the quarks.
Yes, it's not possible. So decidability is determined by the satisfaction of demand for fallibility in the context in question. So I use and it's important that I use these terms to of in which is I know is confusing to early entrants, but I use these terms to make sure we're not confusing mathematics and programming with high dimensional closure domains, right? I mean, low dimensional closure versus high dimensional closure. I mean, the universe is quite complex
Hmm.
compared to the grammar of mathematics. So, you really need the paradigm. What am I trying to? What's the set of things I'm trying to work with? How do I get a system of measurement? What's the grammar to work with it? What produces closure? And then when I apply it, I need to know decidability. So it's an epistemic arc, right? Problem, theory, law, test, right?
So, in the audience, I realized Elaine asked, in biology and social sciences, isn't there always incomplete closure because it's possible that all available models fail to fully capture the causal mechanisms that are in effect?
For in individual cases, that is possible that you are correct, right? There is cases. The precision of the output is dependent on the precision of the measures, and the precision of measures is dependent is the output is dependent on not only the precision of the measures, but the precision of the grammar, right, and the precision of the closure. So yeah, there can be cases, but the difference is something that um, uh, is a universal question. Whenever we're trying to reduce something to any form of grammar, any language of any kind, we are using some form of compression, right? And compression includes some form of generalization.
Hmm.
So generally, when we're trying to describe things, we have to compress to something that's transferable between minds and comparable and measurable. The next thing is once we have that, we have to be able to, hope I didn't lose it. Um, we have to be able to compression, and then what was the other word I used? Compression. I went down a rat hole. Now I can't rewind. You any idea what I was saying there, Francis? Can you help me out? No, I went down a
That,
rat hole. Give me the. Can you tell her the
well,
question?
so the question is, in biology and social sciences, isn't there always incomplete closure? Because it's possible that all available models fail to fully capture the causal
There's
mechanisms that are in effect.
incomplete information, right, leads to incomplete capacity to produce closure, right? However, compression is part of that process, and decidability is. It's, give me it again one more time. I lose it every single time.
The original question,
Yeah,
incomplete in biology and social sciences, isn't there always incomplete closure because it's possible that all available models fail to fully capture the causal mechanisms that are in place. But I think the difference here is, again, it comes back to what closure actually means, right? Just because you have
I got it.
insufficient
Let me
precision.
just get it out so I don't
Okay.
forget it. It's compression and generalization. So, I mean, the second term I was looking for was generalization. I kept losing it because I'm so fascinated by compression. Sorry. So go ahead and continue. Continue what you're saying.
Finish your line of thought. Compression and
So,
generalization.
okay. So whenever you're there, there's no, I mean, describing a thing does not require a rule. It just requires describing a thing in detail, right? So what we're generally looking for is knowledge, right? We're looking for some sort of generalization, a rule which we can apply to multiple cases,
Mm-hmm.
right? So that doesn't mean that if we've got a rule that we can apply to cases in a field, that there isn't still a distribution of outcomes within that generalization. In other words, there's still going to be tail effects, which is that are not captured by the reduction, which and the generalization, right? There's always going to be a distribution. So what does that? I'm again watching you. I'm not sure.
I'm thinking about biology and social science case, right? What Langan was saying. I think he's, in a lack of better words, he's mistaken the lack of closure for insufficiency of measurement.
Correct.
Right. When you say compression generalization, to me, what that means is we have not sufficiently distinguished a disambiguity between two similar positions. There may be a third in the middle. And if we do not have a position name for it, then we cannot describe the causal relationship. That doesn't
Correct.
mean that the domain cannot achieve closure, because we've defined the number of dimensions, we've defined the operations between and relationship between those dimensions. The lack of specific position name or set of position names insufficient to describe the phenomena does not mean that the domain cannot achieve closure.
Correct. Correct. God, that was good. Thank you. Very smart. I tend to think very abstractly, so it's I appreciate it when you bring things down to the actual case. So yeah, but what remember that my mission, I shouldn't say our mission, but my mission is to produce law, which is to give a general rule within which a distribution can be captured, right? But that does not mean that there are not combination of edge cases, right? That would lead you to say, well, there are other laws, there are other general rules that would apply in this instance, right? That's not the case. We're just trying to create the logic so that those of a sufficient precision that those questions can be asked without subjective judgment and answered without. It doesn't mean we're going to know the answer. What it means is we will identify what we don't know. Does that make sense? I mean, a lot of our epistemic work is a series of tests, the most of which say we just don't know this thing. That tells us to go look into that part of the problem rather than try to keep hypothesizing at a level of abstraction which doesn't give us the information necessary to direct our investigation
In
and
other,
obtain
in other
measurements.
words, if you don't even know that you're missing a dimension or missing a set of relationships or a grammar to describe that relationship, then you cannot know the exact positioning. The space is much more becomes convoluted. But once you've deduced down to the dimensions and the relationships and specify the grammar for the relationship, for lack of better words, then you can actually look for those precise the missing positions.
So let me unify our statement with Martin's earlier. So when we say continuous recursive disambiguation, that's what we mean, is that we have disambiguated down to a point where we discovered we lack the information to disambiguate.
We
Right?
lacked the ability to measure and disambiguate.
Correct.
But it doesn't mean that we cannot achieve closure because the grammar itself describes that phenomenon, describes that paradigm fully.
Right. So, right, we can still obtain closure even if in this particular instance we realize we're lacking some information. It doesn't mean closure is impossible.
I think this is the point. I finally got it. When you say decidable versus not, if we miss that position name, if we do not have a sufficient way to measure it, then it becomes undecidable.
That's correct. And this is where subjectivity comes in, and that's the problem. Is that the real problem, of course, is that the lawyers try to actually get you to a point where you make the decision subjectively because they don't want to deal with the objective.
I think using a social science example, right? So as you know, I'm trained in application to violence at all different levels. And there's a reciprocal application of violence, i.e. the self-defense or whatever the irreciprocal means, of which murder is one of them. If we don't even have it once we define, it's actually two dimensions. You have one dimension, use of force. The other dimension is whether it's reciprocal versus irreciprocal, right? Just break it down to very simple terms. But if you don't have a position name for murder, then in law, it becomes undecidable.
Yes, correct. Well done. Yeah, you guys are smarter than you look. Martin, what's a thing I say all the time, by the way, to the audience? We all tease each other. So this is where Martin is right. This is how we get to explain why Martin was right earlier, is that you're always trying to find a new. What you're really trying to do is find the whatever it is that isn't subject to closure, and then go search for correlations that may provide you with insight into the solution, into narrowing that particular thing to the point of closure.
And I realized that's actually what English common law does.
Exactly.
The reason why I have cases and the case precedents that once they discover a new way for people to break the law, they put a name to it. At some point, like arson did not exist as a crime, or like some other what is it? What's a good economic crime that's only invented in the 20th century? Like Ponzi scheme, right? Was not a thing, but now the law that tried and discovered and put a name to it, and now you can be punishable. Now the law can punish you for engaging in Ponzi schemes.
Yeah. And so what the law looks for is very similar to what we produce. We produce a canon of saying, run this test, ignorance, error, bias, right? We also do, realism, naturalism, identity, right? Reciprocity, all that crap. We do all these questions, but those are dimensional tests, right? They're dimensional tests. What the law does is the same thing. They're like, give me a fucking checklist to make this decidable. That's basically what the law does.
Mm-hmm.
Is it looks for checklists to make things decidable. You know, people say, well, it's the West invented the science. I'm like, well, the West invented law that without in the absence of authority, right? So since there's no authority, that you need to have decidability. So the West invented
The
law.
West invented the paradigm to achieve
Yes,
decidability and a lack of central authority.
correct. And
Or
so
actually, maybe more like the
authority.
grammar, set of grammar.
There's
so
still
this is
authority. It's just distributed. But without authority, there's no law.
Without
yeah,
central state issued
yeah,
authority.
you mean discretion. Let's just make sure. Yes, you are right. There's a difference between discretionary authority and rule-based authority, but yes. Um, Martin is big on making this point because he's correct. I'm just saying that there's a difference between discretion and rule, and that technically speaking, that's what rule of law means: is the absence of discretion.
Mm-hmm.
It's properties. It's the absence of discretion, and your rank or status or whatever doesn't matter, right? I mean, it's those two basic things.
Okay. I think we should move on to the next question. This broke the record as the longest we spent on answering the first question, and I apologize. I apologize for the digression, but I think it's important to get it across.
Well, it's also a fucking hard question. Jesus, I mean, it's not like they teach this in college.
Yeah, because this whole thing about closure and paradigm grammar, ability to achieve closure, and decidability lies at the heart of analyte method.
Yes, yeah, it's
I think Francis just couldn't tolerate that the first answer was that short.
No, I honestly trying to get us to answering the first question in the shortest manner possible. But I guess I leveraged my privilege to be actually on this call and got us down this rabbit hole.
That's copy. That's great.
All right. Without further ado, apologies to Brunei Helicopter Squad. Well, he waited for 2-something months, and he can wait for like another 30 minutes or so. So question 2 from Brunei Helicopter Squad. Curt has definitely already written about this, but what causes masculine and intelligent men to be ridiculously wrong? Russell, Rawls, Kaku, etc. on matters which are demonstrably false. Maybe they simply haven't adequately taught empirical epistemology.
I don't know what masculinity means here. Were they leaders of their community, mentors to other men, responsible fathers and husbands? Could they throw a punch, deadlift for 100 pounds? Or is the idea that masculinity is autism?
Oh, wow, that was really interesting. Well, I mean, autism is the end point of the masculine biased brain. So yeah, I mean,
I wouldn't equate it to masculinity, though.
Well,
Masculinity.
you're, but that's again, right? So when I use the term in this context, I mean the male bias as in the brain. I've been getting shit for this all the time. You call it the male brain, all right? And that assumes that it's always just men that think like this, right? Or the female brain or the feminine. So I go to the masculine and feminine mind, and then that just means that you can be a man with a feminine mind or a woman with a feminine mind, right? And then I go and I say, okay, I use masculine and feminine to be the generalization of the cause, and somebody says, but that's not masculine. I'm those fucking different things. I'm talking about the cognitive bias in the brain, not the other stuff. But anyway, systematizing bias. How about that? That's how I get around it with a safety problem. Is I just talk about an empathizing versus systematizing instead of male versus female, and it doesn't fucking yell at me for being, a sexist or something like that.
Okay, I don't know if these people are outright autists, but the trend is that autists have no idea what people are like, and so they're try to construct a system that completely ignores actual human nature, like utilitarianism from Bentham, the idea that government should be maximizing pleasure of the people. It's the stupidest idea I've ever heard.
Okay, so I'm going to.
Hold on. Before you go down that rabbit hole, maybe we should answer this question. And I think
I'm
Curt,
gonna
what
answer
you,
the,
huh?
I can answer the question. It's not that hard.
Okay.
So feminine empathizing in time and risk evasion in order to abstain status. Masculine systematizing over time in order to obtain status by capital acquisition. Excuse me, the feminine consumption, masculine capital acquisition. This is basically two different kinds of responsibility. So that's what masculine and feminine mean in the cognitive science, right? Now, the question is, let me see if I can get this. Where's the question? Can you read me the question again so I don't have to
Yeah,
fucking find
Curt
it?
has definitely already written about this, but what causes masculine and intelligent men to be ridiculously wrong on
Right.
matters which are demonstrably false? Maybe they simply haven't been adequately taught empirical epistemology.
Okay. You see this more in men than women because we are systematizers. So what you will see, and it's endemic on the right, right? It's endemic on the right, is that men find a competitive advantage in a frame of reference, right? They find it and they double down on it in increasingly, and they develop this frame, right? Or set of paradigms, whatever you want to call, to the point where they are trying to solve problems with this pie slice of knowledge instead of the whole pie. And so what they do is they take their insight past, or their frame past the point of which it's applicable, it's survivably applicable. This is universal on the right. You find some guy who takes a theological position, some guy who finds a philosophical position, some guy finds some pseudoscientific position, some guy finds a section of science that works for him. And instead of broadening in so that they have a broad tool shed, in other words, they just keep doubling down on this one thing because that thing provides them with a system of measurement with which to systematize the world that they're looking at. This is the systematizing bias in the male brain. It's a wonderful thing. If you apply it to crafts, it's absolutely the way you get people who innovate in crafts. If you apply it to sciences, you apply it to the sciences, and you become very, very good in that. If you apply it in mathematics, you become very, very good in that. The problem is when you try to apply it to things to situations which are not dependent upon a universal, but on a distribution, and especially an opposing distribution like the biases between the sexes. So what happens with men is they tend to figure something, and we could pick out any number of we could go through every male that's got an angle, right? And that talks about social science or any of the economics or politics. And you can see where he's overextending his concept, right? And that's, in other words, he's reached his point of failure. But it's so easy for him to think within that paradigm because he spent so much time on that paradigm, he can't move between them. One of the reasons I like to emphasize the grammars is so that we are very conscious of the fact which grammar are we talking in, and if I am speaking within a paradigm, right, of my own, that is a way of looking at the universe as basically a frame of reference, that I become aware of its limits. The most common one among males, conservative males at least, it's actually interesting to compare conservatives and libertarians, is that you can solve a problem quickly and directly rather than systematically, which is funny, systematically and incrementally.
So let me use layman's let me use the layman's term for that. This is the persistent way on the right, or at least I'm guilty of it, that we can just shoot people or shoot our way out of this.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And so or just like if we just command, the other one is beliefs, right? If everybody will just believe this, that's the left one, but the right does it as well.
That's the religious
Like,
frame. If
that's the
everyone just
religious,
returned to Jesus, then we
right?
wouldn't have this problem.
Right. The next one is everyone would just think this way, which is the philosophical frame, right? And the other one is if we could just pass a law, that's the authoritative frame. But what's the fucking incentive frame? What makes people, what is the incentive that baits people in the behavior that we want, and the disincentive that prohibits the behavior that we don't want?
Well,
Right?
isn't that what the law is supposed to do?
Well, that's why I work in the law, right? Is so the whereas what we face, the problem we face all the time is that the conservative mind, a systematizing mind, always develops a pie slice of knowledge instead of a breadth of knowledge, and it tries to apply what he knows or he understands to the problem at the scale of he understands the problem.
Again, using a layman speak, if if the only tool you have is a hammer, then every problem looks like a nail.
Exactly. And so if you combine this with the status appeal of being able to use your hammer, right, on a particular set of nails in a social media, you're getting self-image and status from them, so which is causing you to double down on an error. Right. And so what you're always trying to do is what we want you to do is say, okay, if this is what I think, what's its limit, and what do I need to do to decide what to do be outside of that limit, to get beyond that limit. And so I view this as the same thing as the disciplinary problem in universities, right? They've divided us into disciplines so that everybody's ignorant of everything else. And so they don't see the common pattern between them, and so they don't learn. So in that sense, the problem for male systematizing is the combination of the tendency to systematize, the reward system that tells you that provides you with feedback, the tendency to double down on the thing without but the tendency to have placed so much self-image and status in this that you carry it beyond its capacity. This begins to end up with all the examples he gave, Kant and who are the people he gave in the question?
Let me see. Where am I? Russell, Rouse,
Yes,
Kaku.
Werrell. Yep, Kaku. Yep. They get overly obsessed with their doubling down without looking for its limits and its falsification. And to some degree, it's an investment hypothesis. Once you've thrown what's the boat in the water joke? Francis, you're a boat guy.
The what?
Right.
In the water.
Boat is a way of throwing. A boat is a.
Oh, yeah, the boat is a way of just throwing money in. A boat is a hole that you throw money in. The hole in water where you throw money in.
Well, so to some degree, a male obsession within his domain paradigm that he uses for status and self-image becomes a boat that you throw effort into and self-currency into, but it's actually fruitless. You'd end up being like Fukuyama or who's the other guy you mentioned, Kaku or whatever. Who's Bryan? The other one that drives me nuts in physics.
What?
There's a guy in physics. I want to say his name is Bryan. It's probably not right. I can see his face, but I can't. What?
What's he famous for?
He's a string theorist.
I don't know much about string theories.
Anyway, the problem is they get caught on things. It's very rare you get someone like Roger, Sir Roger, who goes into who is right about a lot of things in cosmology. He's right a lot. But then he goes, and when he has got a theory he can't prove, he's like, I don't know, but I mean, it's like it's something I'm working with and trying to figure out. He doesn't approach it with certainty, and then he goes into a field like consciousness, which got him in trouble because it was fucking nuts, right? It was ridiculous. And he says later, I said, well, I shouldn't have gone into that. I really was over my head. And I'm like, okay, there's an honest intellectual. But you get these guys who are still hung up on string theory or my favorite one is the space and time are the same thing. You know, the Einsteinian fallacy. There's just all over. They're all over the place. Or, you know, in economics, that's Martin's criticism is more isn't always better. More is only better when you're answering a weakness, not when you're satisfying an addiction. So more isn't always better. So you find these errors in all fields because that's the paradigm they're working in without having access to multiple paradigms and multiple systems of thought. And so I think it is my problem with it is the overconfidence of young males defending their self-image and status by the use of by trying to extend their competency, their frame of reference beyond its competency. Anyway, so did you think I answered what's his question there? Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Moving on to the next question. Question 3. At what barrier points does lying to yourself, i.e., unjust optimism, fictitious thinking, ideation, for emotional stability become systematically damaging?
At the point you start having influence on policy or beliefs of large numbers of people.
Bam.
Yeah. It's like Martin just goes right to the heart of it, and it's like, okay, there's nothing I can say to add color to it other than, yeah, exactly. Basically, as soon as your externalization of your mental deception is attempting to deceive others and cause them harm by it, for your benefit. So as soon as you're having influence on others, you're basically externalizing your deception. So are you saying the problem? This is why I say that we take the tort view of lying. You don't have to know you're lying or intend to lie. You only have to convey it to be lying. Does that make sense? Right. So we don't care what you intend.
In other words, like anything that falls short of testimony, we can treat it as lying.
Yeah.
Well, then just say spreading falsehood and it won't be confused with intention.
Correct. So that wasn't boring because we could answer. Martin just kills it right out with that's Martin. I love.
I
Martin.
don't know what else is there to say, really.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, that's a short one. I hope that put the matter to rest. Question 5. Why do you consider Obama an F-tier president?
I'm sure Curt will name specific policies. I'll just say being ruled by a member of the different race is a mark of slavery. And white man ruled by a black man is an outright humiliation ritual. And it shows how far most people are gone that they no longer even recognize this.
Francis is laughing. I'm laughing too. It's so Martin. That is a Martin.
Yes, that is a very Martin thing.
That's a very Martin answer. Martin, you know, in the right era, you would have made a great Protestant preacher. Absolutely great, because your capacity to morally load, frame, and disrespect and denigrate and insult people who are acting immorally is quite impressive, really.
I don't know how that would work because I see Christianity as too leftist.
All right. Well, it's because he is an F-tier president. He starts out. He goes to an anti-white church, right? He grows up in an anti-white church, right? He's a what do you call it? The people who are anti-colonialists and anti-white anti-colonials. He goes to a church for that.
Gosh, yeah, I know what you're talking about, but I
You know what I'm
can't.
talking about? I can't remember the name of it, but
Right.
right. He gets into office and he's fundamentally an anti-white, anti-male president. But it's worse than that. Is he's a therapist, right? He's giving therapy while Rome burns. And so the truth is, he did almost nothing as president except dish out therapy. He undermined us internationally. He undermined us domestically. He appointed fucking moron to the Supreme Court, right?
Sotomayor.
Jesus. You take Sotomayor and Jackson. Who's the other dimwit we have?
Yeah. But Jackson. Okay, Jackson is not quite Obama. It's Obama the second term.
Yeah,
i.e. Biden.
it's Biden. Exactly. So, and we didn't even know how that deal was made. The deal
Oh
to
yeah.
put her on the bench. So I'm like, I don't know. I mean, he's certainly one of the worst presidents in history. The problem we have in this America, right, is that people actually want a president who's a priest and a therapist. What we actually need is a president who's a general,
Yes.
tells the truth. That's the problem. And so we get this. We get this for two reasons. Mostly we get it because, as Martin said, Christianity is necessarily a leftist bias, which is harmful to us. And second thing we get it for is it wouldn't be if it was a little more strict, but it is. And then second thing we get it is once we added women into the voting, we would have never had a progressive or other than a conservative president if women weren't voting.
The other justice they were thinking about appointing by of Obama was Elena Kagan. And the interesting thing is, now they just realized, so Chief Justice Roberts was nominated by W. Bush, Bush second, not Bush senior. So only Clarence Thomas was nominated by Bush senior, but he's not Chief Justice.
Yeah. I don't know the reasoning behind that. I don't think Thomas
Well,
would
maybe
want.
it's because we don't want to be ruled by African Americans.
I would suspect it's because Thomas doesn't want to be Chief Justice.
Probably. I was just joking. Well, Martin
No,
isn't here, but
I knew you were joking, but I was saying really. I think it's.
I say that for Martin, and then he was not even here. Wow. Thomas, in another 5 years, Thomas would be on court for 40 years.
Yeah.
4-0.
He is amazing justice. If we could clone him, it would be awesome. It's funny though, if you look at stereotypes, right? I mean, he's raised Catholic, right? So he's trained by the Jesuits, right? So we tend to look at him as a black guy instead of a guy who's black was trained by the Jesuits. But if you look at the rest of them, they fit their stereotypes, don't they? I mean, it's almost painful how accurately the judges fit their stereotypes. Anyway, so
Amy Barrett,
I
the
don't.
liberal white woman.
Jesus Christ! How could you be? I mean, like, how do you get on the bench when you're that? Why did the Congress tolerate that? I mean, you'd think there was moral people in it, but I've given up on the.
No, but I mean, here's the thing, right? Amy Barrett. Okay, at least Barrett is smart.
Yes.
Contrary to the other three women. But the problem is her liberal white women leaning overrules her smart bits more often than not.
Yeah, but at least she will justify it, but she's again inserting discretion.
Yeah, that's a problem.
Um, so that's the problem with the women on the bench in general. All right.
I think we
I'm
killed that
sorry
one.
we can't give you more, but honestly, if you just go into something like Grok and just say honest critical opinion, why is it that Obama is widely considered one of the worst presidents? It will always come down to the one observation that he actually did nothing except talk
It's
therapeutically.
and also actual foreign relations damage, i.e.,
Yeah.
we're in the mess during Iran. Okay, Martin's gonna have something else to say about this, but at least the alleged reason we bombed the crap, we're bombing the crap out of Iran is because they got their uranium enrichment to 60%. The reason they were able to get it to 60% is because freaking Obama, in the middle of the night, right, shipped them pallets full of U.S. dollars in a cargo plane, and then funded
Yes.
them to go enrich that uranium.
Fuck, what an asshole. So,
Like if it's not the government doing it, you would call it money laundering. It's
yes,
throwing in
exactly.
jail.
So can I ask a question on this? Because this is bothering me lately.
Mm-hmm.
When I was growing up, there were, at least in the Senate, there were like Southern Democrats, right? They were proper Americans, right? They were just
Mm-hmm.
responsible, whatever. And what's happened over time is that the South has lost its hostility to the Republican Party, probably because of the motion of the religious right into the Republican Party.
Mm-hmm.
And so it just seems like the Democratic Party is in a death spiral of fucking idiocy. So much so that it's actually rewarding the crazies in the population that they actually have representation. And so I mean I'm like, do we have to get rid of? I mean, I'm speaking euphemistically here, but do we have to literally? If you've ever been a Democrat, you're gone. I mean, you're out of the electorate. I mean, what are we going to do here? Because I don't want to reward the Republicans for being for half doing it. On the other hand, the Democratic Party has become as crazy as the young generation. So, I mean, are they, is there going to be it? I mean, I've seen people think, well, we're going to have a resurgence in the Democratic Party and we're going to do this crap that, what's his name was recommending last week, which is take over the
AOC.
AOC as president. And who's the crazy guy who thinks up Democratic policy? Oh God, I can't remember his name.
Tim
Um,
Walz.
no, he's the tall,
Newsom.
skinny guy, tall, skinny, bald.
Newsom?
Newsom.
Martin, did you say?
Gavin Newsom.
No.
I don't know who
Mary
you're talking
Maitland's
about.
husband. Mary Maitland's husband. What's his name? Anyway, um, much older and more influential than the people you guys are thinking of. So he came on and says, we're going to go stack the court with 4 more Supreme Court justices. We're going to redistrict these things. So basically, he was saying we're to take over and we're going to eradicate any ability to move forward.
Well, I mean, if they do that, then that's just a shortcut to civil war.
That's
And
the shortcut to civil war.
I keep on thinking of that movie, the actual movie Civil War. And spoiler
Yeah.
alert if you haven't watched it. So remember in the end, the president allegedly is trying to get out of the White House complex. They're in a fierce battle, so in a limousine, they're trying to get out. And some what looks like a Ivy League educated girl hop off the back seat, like exit from the back seat, say don't shoot, and then of course she got riddled with bullets. That's what's going to happen to AOC if she becomes president.
Absolutely, no question.
I think depriving the right of false hopes is actually a good thing.
I understand.
You're on the accelerationist side.
Yeah.
I think
Not
Curt and I
not
are
fully,
trying to
but I
prevent a
can.
civil war here.
I'm just trying to prevent a civil war and get us there by other means. But I mean, it doesn't mean I would, if it became necessary, I wouldn't go full Martin with it. You know, I mean, it's just, I have no problem with that. I just can't say it anymore because the FBI threatened me too many times.
Okay, before you dig yourself into more trouble, we should move on.
All right, so I don't. I guess we aren't going to answer that question. I don't know what's going on with the
No, we
Democrats.
already answered the question. The answer is why is Obama why do you consider Obama an F tier president? I think we give you enough of that. Let's just now go like down to the rat hole of civil war or whatnot. The audience can always watch our civil war presentation.
Yep.
Okay, question 5 from Justin. What are your most radical economic ideas and what is the goal of a well-designed economy?
This is not a 10-minute answer. How long are we going?
I can keep going. Or at least I think I don't have a meeting. Yeah, keep going.
So who's starting?
You start.
Okay.
Gentlemen, I'll be right back.
You know, this is. I love this. You give when Martin has something to say, and a lot of it is juicy.
So I've taken it on to re-examine every foundation modern economics stands on, and I've found them all to be leftist premises.
Say
One,
that again. I want to make sure it's clear.
I've found all foundations of modern economics to be basically leftist premises. So one, consumption cannot be treated as an inherently positive outcome. It's often contrary to what's in the long-term interests of the individual and even more so collective good. A right-wing system would have higher ends with consumption only serving as means to them and being treated as wasteful otherwise. 2. Profit motive is to be understood as a neutral incentive and not automatically presumed to lead inherently to pro-social outcomes. Say what you will about leftists, they at least understand this, so they have no clue as to how to solve it. 3. Individual choice cannot be treated as something inviolable. True right-wing understands an individual is only a part of a larger whole, has a role to play in it and a rank within various hierarchies, and his choices can thus be constrained for the benefit of the whole or even for his own good. This is something we barely still accept in parent-child relationships. 4. We cannot get myopic about what kind of products the economy is producing, let alone what the GDP is, and ignore what kind of man and woman it's producing. 5. Dependence and fragility for the sake of efficiency must be rejected or at worst accepted contextually as a necessary evil. Instead, some incentives have to be placed on individual and local self-sufficiency and redundancy in vital production. The exception is any production which serves the purpose of national sovereignty. This ought to be as efficient as possible. 6. Standard of living, a measure of available consumption, must be rejected in favor of considering whether the individual has a sense of purpose from being needed and relied on, and strength of the relationships. The market has deprived of this as much as the liberal democratic state. 7. Relatedly, frictions cannot automatically be treated as something to be removed. Instead, we consider how they affect character and what kind of positive externalities a given friction has. In other words, what kind of ecological function it's serving. The simplest example being forced to go outside to interact with other people to get one's needs met instead of a few clicks on the internet. 8. Work that rewards mastery ought to be seen as generally preferable to the one that turns an individual into an easily replaceable cog. Quality over quantity. 9. Interests of future generations are to be considered and accounted for. Wasteful use of scarce resources thus highly disincentivized or outright prohibited. Some level of readiness to function after they run out must be maintained, such as maintaining skills and some land for food production without fertilizer. Then, opportunity costs must be accounted for, at least at scale. Considering how choices of one man affect opportunities of all others may be impractical, but ignoring when the choice of one man affects opportunities of thousands of or millions of other men is far worse. 11. Stability must be seen as valuable in itself. Economic calculation may conditionally produce better and cheaper products, but benefits don't necessarily outweigh the cost of stress from constant churn and a loss of everything cherished to creative destruction. 12. The purpose of commodities must be considered and improper use penalized. Houses are for living in, not for financial speculation. 13. Deconflate production incentives from surplus usage. People need to be paid enough to choose to do the given work rather than other available alternatives, including the business owner. But what happens with anything above that is a political choice.
Oh, I love this, Martin. I'm trying to generalize it. So the problem, the way I'm going to frame it, I'm going to frame what you're saying in my terms, not to put words in your mouth, but to try to generalize what you're saying into something that can be understood as a set of principles.
I know the simplest problems I can point out is that all economists are utilitarians.
Yeah, but it has to do with the beginning of the last century, right? So once it was a big deal to people that they could around the turn of the 20th century is that scarcity, people had lived in scarcity for a long time, for all of human history. So they became a little bit stupidly euphoric across the spectrum. And and where morality had been partly the means of existence under scarcity, they felt that the limit had been removed. They were wrong. But I can step back in their shoes and understand how they could be that foolish, right? So the progressive movement is almost certainly what we would consider an amoral or immoral movement, the purpose of which was to take advantage of what they perceived as infinite growth and the end of scarcity. You can see that. I mean, that's right. So I don't want to go back in time and accuse people of being stupid when they don't know they're being stupid.
I point out that practically from the beginning, as liberalization of markets started, there were people that were seeing what it's doing to their communities
There
and
were.
traditions.
Absolutely, and you are right. It just that's correct, but you have the temptation of the cornucopia in competition with the requirement for constraint, and the incentives which is where I'm going, in a democratic polity are to satisfy the wants and needs of the vox populi who vote. So the people voted for and got what they wanted. They just didn't realize what they were voting for and getting was harmful to them in the long term. So there's number one. So this understanding why it happened is number one. I'm going to try to get through this logic if I can. The second point is what that really meant is that people no longer had to exercise responsibility, the scope of responsibility that they had previously, right? And I see that as the core issue underneath it. That's my view. The third is that democratic polities tend to make these mistakes. They are wonderful in the distribution of proceeds during windfalls, and they are terrible at the restoration of constraints when those windfalls are over with. What I mean is, uh, I'm I still remain a monarchist, um, and uh, and I feel like our laws need to incorporate what we have learned so that we don't repeat what we have just done. A monarchist so that we have limits on democracy. I prefer a nobility as well, even if that we call that a senate, and to defend against the fashions of the people. And yes, it's nice to have a house that has the fashions of the people, but the problem is you need to have this people in the Senate and have an intergenerational interest, just like the monarchy does. And so we don't have those things. What we have is people who basically commit the tragedy of the commons at scale under the justification for it called democracy. So we don't have intergenerational plan. What you're really saying is we need intergenerational responsibility in planning, right? That goes above the temptations of the day. And we have created an set of institutions that do exactly the opposite. They fall prey to the temptations of the day, the folly of the masses, and the tendency of the masses to choose for the least amount of individual responsibility when we need exactly the opposite. So the only problem I am going to address with your recommendations isn't that any of them are wrong. It's that whenever you put into place these things, you have to find some way of limiting them as well as limiting their opposition. So, because what tends to happen is you tend to get a bureaucracy or a set of ruling classes that basically make a living off of preventing other people from advancing anything.
Yeah, I absolutely wouldn't propose this as a plan for some democratic party.
Yeah, I understand.
To come with rejection of democracy.
Yes, yes. Well, I know that, right? I'm actually just trying to put what you are saying into more general terms. And so I don't. You are correct in what needs to be done. The problem is, as I view it, is not that it's incorrect. It's that how do we implement it so that it doesn't cause the opposite problem. So that's the only question I have is to point out that what you're looking for is intergenerational responsibility for the good of the community, and that the state, that the manager, that the absence of a monarchy, the natural tendency of the democratic state, the natural tendency of democratic state once women are voters, all choose short-term consumption over long-term capitalization, irresponsibility instead of responsibility. And I'm saying those things are true. We can't get around them. They're not going to ever change. So what is the government we need to have that maintains both the capacity for continuous competitive innovation at the same time as preserving generational and intergenerational responsibility for the common good. And I don't know why it's fucking miraculous that we should, in retrospect, be here at the end of our civilization. That's why we got Aristotle and fucking Plato for the same reason. It's why we got some of the greatest thinkers in Rome for this same reason. Is we got some of the greatest thinkers in the Middle East were due to their observations of the failing of Islam. So I think that I don't think it's a surprise we're here. I think it's just it's up to us to create the rules and guidelines so that it doesn't happen, that we can get a restoration and have it happen again. But otherwise, I agree with you entirely.
And my argument about innovation has been that the really transformative innovations don't come from the market almost ever. They come from the military, and they come from geniuses who pursue it for other reasons than financial.
So let me state that the way I understand it. The way I understand it is the military used to be the engine. The military was the engine of strategic advantage, and the capitalists were the engine of settling the continent in America, and that this became our de facto division of responsibility. For some reasons, which we can go into at length, the other than what I see as DARPA right now, the military ceased being the engine of innovation, and it happened gradually from the attacks on the military during Vietnam to the complete undermining of it during and the post Cold War, right after 92. And so what happened is that the public sector picked up on what had been military investment, which is the internet, and ran with it. So yes, the way I think we have it in the Constitution, even if poorly written at this point, is that we need to charter um, the military with preservation of strategic advantage. And we have made the mistake of handing over who gets funding for scientific inquiry to scientists, and instead have, because that has just led into the situation we have today where all sorts of stupid shit gets funded and the important stuff doesn't. Um, I mean, why isn't there a government program to solve the battery problem? Why is Elon doing that? I mean, that's just they're just why isn't the government solving the power problem and leaving it to the industry to solve it, the power problem? And so instead, why is the government trying to remove people from responsibility and satisfy their responsibilities rather than to maintain competitive?
I would interject here a little bit. I don't think
Yes,
it's up to the government to solve specific problems that the private sector can solve, such as better battery something. It's up to the government to fund the researches that are otherwise commercially unviable.
correct, absolutely. Um, it's to this is why one of the things I say is we should do it this way. Think of this as the investment spectrum. Of course, my hands, the investment spectrum, right? Um, Up here, there's stuff that is strategically valuable,
Hmm.
but commercially, the returns on it are speculative and too long term. Down here, they have quote investment, which is really usury of computer and consumers, right? And so I would say we want to move people out of this so they are in the place where we want to move investment out of parasitism on consumers, and we want to move it into um, things that the commercial sector can solve, and we want to take the military or strategic sector and move it into and say you people are responsible for to funding what has to be done. I mean, the battery thing is my favorite example, but um,
Uh,
choosing not to fund research. I mean, who's funding the research for modular nuclear reactors?
no idea.
I don't know either, but I don't know
Hmm.
why it is
That should
Manhattan.
be something. Yeah, it should be something that the government funds through programs like Manhattan Project and so
Yeah,
on. It's fund the fundamental research, because fundamental research, the goal of fundamental research isn't to, well, the immediate goal at least isn't necessarily to find a solution, but it funds the falsification of
yeah,
increasing level of falsification. The whatever
yeah.
sticks, that actually becomes the issue. Now that's why it's it's so expensive because of the amount of failure, and you can't expect a private entity that does not have the ability to create its own credit, i.e., borrow time from the future to fund that kind
Yep.
of research, because they go bankrupt.
Correct.
So rather than the government trying to solve the battery problem, the government should fund a series of material science researchers and keep the big brain IQ 150s going until
Yeah.
they found a fundamental research that can then be turned into applied science that someone like Elon's can go make a battery.
Yep. Yep. It's well said. Trying to think if I said anything in this blue here that Justin would want to know. I just think it's funny. I think the radical stuff is our restructuring of the financial section, including banking and insurance, um, uh, because I view that as it's the worst of bureaucracy and the most parasitic. So that's my big one. The second most uh, is the court reforms, and how the court has become proceduralism rather than justice. And then the rest of them are the marriage, divorce, education, federal department organization responsibilities, and devolution to the states. Um, the Those are the big ones. We sort of go through all sorts of things, but those are the really big ones. They are not really. I don't consider them that radical in the sense of they have some. There's no utopianism to it at all. It's just observed failure mechanisms and how to correct the observed failure mechanisms. And one of the things that we don't account for, we don't think of, is that most of our bureaucracies did develop in the age of teletype and telephone, right? They matured under radio and television, and they sort of stagnated in the era of big iron computing. And the thing today is that, and I say this in criticizing most of the geopolitical commentators, is that information is available to you today about almost everything in almost immediately, and the that our institutions were not formed during that, when that was true. And so they tend to be less responsive than they need to be, and they tend to make assumptions that are not they're no longer legitimate. The marriage divorce is one we deal with all the time. Dating, marriage, and divorce is one we deal with all the time. That's a separate discussion. Education is a totally failed program for reasons we understand. The organization of the federal departments is based on the error I just elaborated. Um, and devolution to the states is simply necessary, since the states are not, Cthulhu always swims left, and the states need not to have federal intervention in their choice of the kind of society they want to produce. They should only protect the individual rights from abuse in those societies. So I don't. In other words, that's the common element we have, but we need to let states go their
I'd argue even those individual rights need to be limited.
I think that's what I'm saying. Yes. Yes, I agree.
Like, they shouldn't just kill you, they should at least give you a chance to leave, maybe something like that.
Yep. Yep. All right. So that's what I got.
All right, we got time for one more, or should we call it here?
I think Suki's got a question here.
Oh, Suki has several
He's always
questions.
got a question.
We can do one more for Suki. I don't want to do the one afterwards. That one's too.
That one's too long. All right, so question says from Suki, thoughts on Chris Langan's CTMU. I don't even know what that stands for.
Computers. I forgot. I haven't looked into it too deeply and feel no particular need to. What I've seen, I can grant him that it looks internally consistent, but that's about it. Largely looks like a reuse of older religious concepts with more modern terms.
Cognitive theory model of the universe.
All right. So I've had a few. First of all, I think Chris and I have a sort of informal agreement not to beat each other up too much. Um, I think of him as having his heart in the right place. All right. And
Sure.
all right, I think he has his heart in the right place. What he means is he isn't trying to do what we're doing, which is separate the grammars into systems of measurement. All right. He's trying to unify them all as theology compatible with philosophy, compatible with at least mathematics, and maybe somewhat science. And it's an interesting track, but it's also, if you once you get into it, it sounds good if you're like, you're an uncloseted Christian or um, a person who's into philosophy, but you don't really have a depth of it. And so what he's done is essentially tried to merge theology, philosophy, and empiricism into one. I'm sure he'd object if I said it, if you heard me say it that way, but that's what it looks like to me. And so he's merged these things into one, and he's tried to create a pattern between them to show the legitimacy of them. Um, I've read it multiple times. It's actually based, it's not like our stuff, which based on volumes of stuff, right? He's basically got a couple of papers out there. And I'm not an average guy, but I mean, I can see what he's doing there. And it looks like a nice philosophical attempt, which he defends a little too much like destiny, if you know what I mean. Um, and it doesn't really stand. It's another narrative that puts together a view of the universe as holistic. In that sense, it's quite nice, but in the sense of um, is there any science here? Is there anything testifiable here? I would say no. So I don't really. We don't. He doesn't work in our universe. He only works in our universe, and that because we make certain moral claims in very intellectual terms, some people put us together and ask us the question. But I don't want to invest in criticizing Langan, right? I mean, it's not. It's like, why pick on people who have at least moral objectives? I don't care if you're wrong, if you have if you're trying hard, so to speak. Um, but there's nothing deep to be found there. In other than, as Martin mentions, if you want a way to maintain your religious devotion and still sort of look at the world, the universe systematically, maybe that's possibly a use for it. Otherwise, that's all there is I have to say. I don't want to start something with him because I have to attack him in order to defend against him, and I don't want to do that. I mean, there's plenty of people to beat up on. We have leftists to beat up on. I mean,
There's much larger fields of
really,
opportunity.
we have so much of opportunity. Why pick on well-meaning near neighbors?
Right.
Well,
Punch right.
you could say leftists are kind of a low-hanging fruit.
That's true. That's true. It is true. I mean, because I
And
don't
they
know how
keep
you
on
can.
multiplying. Unlike low-hanging fruits, which eventually run out, you can just keep on picking at them and they still come back.
Yeah, I mean, Jesus, unbelievable, unbelievable, and it's terrible among the young. I mean, their nitwittery is unbelievable. Anyway,
Well,
all right. So is that I don't want to go into the. Oh,
I think we're done.
these two questions are related. I didn't notice that before. All right.
Oh,
I
is
would
it?
rather
Oh, okay,
go
I
ahead.
see. Yeah.
So I didn't realize that they were related. I don't think I can do this.
All right, we're gonna have to save it for next time then.
Yeah, we're gonna have to save it. It's
Yeah.
too much. All right, you gonna do your
Okay.
thing?
I thought you were gonna do your thing.
Well, I mean, you got to give me permission.
Oh yes. Oh well, then like, bell, subscribe.
Yes. All right. This is Martin, Francis, and Curt for the Natural Institute. This has been our office hours Q&A for Friday, May 1st, 2026. If you want to leave us a question, please put it in the description below.
Description.
The
The
link, see the
form.
link in the
The
description
link.
below.
The form. The link to the form in the description.
Great. And otherwise, thank you for your attention. It was fun. Bye bye.
All right.